My name is Claire Thompson. I am 32 years old, and I track vanished millions for a living. 3 weeks before my wedding, my fiancé walked into our kitchen at midnight, holding a liability waiver and a background check. He told me my father had just called him. He said my father confessed I had a hidden criminal record for embezzlement. Ethan slid a silver fountain pen across the granite counter and told me to sign the waiver to protect his banking license. He looked terrified. But when I opened my laptop and showed him the real federal database, the color left his face for a very different reason. The man I was about to marry was not afraid of a crime I committed. He was terrified I had just uncovered his. Before I explain what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Sophia Told Stories. Only do this if you genuinely connect with stories about women who balance the ledger. Tell me in the comments how old you are and where you are listening from right now. I love knowing who is tuning in. Let me take you back to that rainy night in Bedford, New Hampshire. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 11:30 when the front door rattled open. Ethan pushed the heavy oak shut. Water dripped from his wool trench coat, pooling dark and slick on the hardwood floor. He walked straight into the kitchen where I was reviewing spreadsheets for a forensic audit. His breathing sounded shallow. He stopped at the far edge of the island. From his inner pocket, he pulled a folded sheath of paper. "Your father just called me," Ethan said. His voice wavered. He ran a hand through his damp hair. His eyes darted from the paperwork to my face. "He told me, Claire, he told me everything." I closed my spreadsheet. I looked at the papers he pushed toward me. The top page bore the seal of a cheap online background check service. "He told you what, Ethan?" I kept my tone level. "About the sealed record." Ethan placed both hands on the edge of the counter. "The embezzlement charge from when you were 19. Robert said, 'You hid it from me.' He said, 'If my firm finds out I am marrying someone with a financial felony, it will ruin my career.'" Ethan reached into his pocket and produced that silver pen. He set it down next to the second document, the liability waiver. "I love you," he whispered. His features contorted into a mask of desperate devotion. "I do not care about your past, but I need you to sign this. It legally separates our assets. It is the only way I can protect us both." Before the wedding, I stared at the silver pen. Then I looked at the man I was supposed to marry in 21 days. Investment bankers are trained to project unwavering confidence, but Ethan had a visible tremor in his left hand. A casual observer would see a terrified fiancé trying to salvage his future. "I saw a man overplaying a bad hand. A sealed record," I repeated. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I opened a new browser tab on my laptop. I bypassed the commercial search engines and logged directly into the federal court records database. "Claire, please just sign it. Robert is trying to help us mitigate the fallout." I typed my name into the search bar and hit enter. The screen blinked. Search results 0. I turned the laptop so the screen faced him. Ethan stared at the empty page. His jaw worked silently. "There is no record," I said. "But since we are running audits on my family tonight, let us cast a wider net." I cleared the search field. I typed in Robert Thompson. The system processed the query for 3 seconds. When the page refreshed, it generated a 70-page unsealed federal indictment: wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering through offshore holdings. Ethan leaned in. His eyes scanned the dense legal text. I watched his face. He did not look like a man discovering his future father-in-law was a career criminal. The feigned confusion vanished. A cold, sharp panic replaced it. His gaze locked onto the third page where the Department of Justice listed the primary shell entities used to hide the missing funds. Right at the top of the list was Apex Holdings. I recognized the name. It was the primary registered agent Ethan managed at his banking firm. Ethan was not shaking because my father had warned him about a fake crime. Ethan was shaking because the real investigation had already begun, and he needed my signature to build his firewall. I reached out and snapped the laptop shut. The sudden crack of plastic echoing against the granite made Ethan flinch. I did not accuse him. I did not ask why his elite investment banking firm appeared on a Department of Justice watch list. Confronting a cornered animal only forces it to bite. I needed him docile. I needed him to believe his manipulation had hit the mark. I let my shoulders drop. I covered my face with both hands and forced a harsh, ragged breath through my teeth. I played the devastated and confused bride. Ethan reacted instantly. The tension bled out of his frame. He rounded the kitchen island and wrapped his arms around my shoulders, pulling me against his damp wool trench coat. I hated the smell of the wet fabric and the chill of the rainwater seeping through my thin cotton shirt. But I buried my face in his chest. I let him hold me. I let him stroke my hair while he whispered soft assurances into the quiet kitchen. He promised we would figure it out together. He vowed to shield me from my father and the consequences of my supposed dark past. Every syllable he spoke was a calculated and polished lie. My mother passed away from ovarian cancer during my sophomore year of college. Her departure left a hollow silence in our home that nobody knew how to fill. She bequeathed me a modest life insurance policy and a singular guiding philosophy. I remember her sitting at the dining room table, balancing her checkbook with a red pencil, despite the chemotherapy draining her strength. She would peer over her reading glasses and tell me that numbers never lie, ever. But the men writing them do. That lesson shaped my entire adult life. It pushed me toward a career in forensic accounting. It taught me to seek truth in raw data rather than place my trust in empty promises. My father, Robert Thompson, operated on a different wavelength. He built his local real estate development empire on effortless charm and opaque handshake deals. He sold grand visions while ignoring structural flaws. Within a year of burying my mother, he married Susan. My new stepmother was a woman driven by country club status, elite social circles, and maintaining flawless public appearances. Susan preferred curated perfection over genuine connection. My decision to build an independent career rather than join the family business infuriated them both. They wanted a loyal pawn who would nod at their galas. I chose to become an auditor instead. The morning sun broke through the storm clouds, casting long, sharp shadows across the kitchen floor. Ethan stood by the front door adjusting the knot of his silk tie. He looked well-rested and quietly triumphant. He leaned down to kiss my forehead, acting every bit the perfect and supportive fiancé. He topped the liability waiver still resting on the counter and gently reminded me to review the clauses before the end of the day. He stepped out into the crisp New Hampshire air and drove his luxury sedan to his downtown firm. I waited until his car turned the corner at the end of our street. I locked the deadbolt. I poured a cup of black coffee and walked into my home office. Ethan thought I was a fragile woman, paralyzed by a sudden family scandal. He forgot the nature of my profession. I hunt financial ghosts for corporate clients. I boot up my primary workstation and watch my 3 monitors glow to life. I opened the browser and logged into our joint wedding checking account. On the surface, the digital ledger looked immaculate. We had an $80,000 budget allocated for a lavish reception at the Bedford Country Club. The line items showed routine scheduled disbursements, catering fees, floral arrangements, live entertainment bookings, venue deposits. Everything appeared normal to a casual observer. I selected the transaction history and exported the raw data into my specialized auditing software. I isolated the outgoing wire transfers and began stripping away the benign merchant labels. I pulled the actual routing numbers attached to the vendor payments. A standard domestic wire transfer carries a specific 9-digit transit code. The numbers flashing across my screen contained distinct alphanumeric sequences indicative of international routing protocols. I traced the destination node through 2 intermediary banks. The funds were not going to a local New Hampshire florist or a regional event planner. The money was streaming directly into a blind corporate trust located in the Cayman Islands. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. The coffee turned bitter on my tongue. The first pebble of conflict had just triggered an avalanche. I cross-referenced the outgoing offshore wires with our recent deposit history. Over the past 3 months, my father had been uncharacteristically generous. He provided periodic financial contributions, claiming he wanted to ease the burden of the wedding costs. I looked at the exact amounts. Each contribution was precisely $10,000. In financial forensics, we call this tactic structuring. Depositing cash in $10,000 increments avoids triggering automatic Internal Revenue Service reporting thresholds. Robert transferred the dirty money into our joint account. Ethan coded the outgoing transactions as legitimate wedding vendor expenses. Then Ethan wired the clean funds to the Caribbean Trust. They were laundering money right under my nose. The sheer brilliance of their scheme made my chest tighten. Any banking algorithm monitoring the transfers would see my name attached to the joint account. I hold a pristine certified fraud examiner license. My professional credentials act as an impenetrable shield. Regulatory compliance software inherently ignores accounts held by senior auditors because we are the ones who write and enforce the security protocols. Robert and Ethan weaponized my spotless reputation. They turned my identity into the ultimate camouflage for their offshore syndicate. Ethan had not been planning a wedding. He had been executing a prolonged financial crime using our marriage as the operational vehicle. I needed more evidence. I accessed our local network router and bypassed the basic firewall on Ethan's personal cloud drive. He kept his automatic synchronization enabled for his home laptop. I sifted through his hidden directories, ignoring the wedding planning folders and the vacation itineraries. I found a locked folder labeled Legal Documentation. I ran a quick decryption script and opened the contents. Inside sat a newly drafted post-nuptial agreement. It was the companion piece to the liability waiver he pushed across the kitchen island at midnight. I read the dense legal clauses carefully. The document was designed to legally tether my clean credit and my professional auditing license to Robert's toxic assets the exact moment I said my vows. It contained embedded language that guaranteed I would absorb the financial ruin when the federal indictment inevitably dropped. Ethan was building a lifeboat out of my career and preparing to let me drown. My cell phone buzzed on the desk, shattering the quiet hum of the computer fans. A text message illuminated the screen. It was my stepmother, Susan. She demanded I meet her for coffee at a high-end cafe in Portsmouth that afternoon. She stated we needed to discuss important family paperwork before the wedding invitations went out. The trap was closing in from all sides. I drove east toward Portsmouth, watching the gray Atlantic Ocean churn against the rocky New Hampshire coastline. The cafe Susan chose sat nestled in the historic district surrounded by boutique shops and cobblestone sidewalks. It catered exclusively to old money and quiet wealth. The air inside smelled of roasted espresso beans and expensive vanilla perfume. I found my stepmother occupying a corner booth near the bay window. She wore a tailored cream blazer and oversized sunglasses pushed back into her blonde hair. Her posture radiated impatience. She tapped a manicured fingernail against a porcelain saucer. As I approached the table, she did not stand to greet me. She simply pointed to the empty leather chair opposite her position. Susan entered my life when I was still navigating the raw grief of losing my mother. She quickly replaced our worn family photo albums with framed country club membership certificates. Her entire existence revolved around perceived social hierarchy. She traded genuine affection for calculated optics. Today was no different. Before I could even take off my coat, Susan reached into her designer tote bag. She retrieved a thick manila envelope and pushed it across the polished mahogany table. The package stopped inches from my hands. "Ethan mentioned you were hesitating on the paperwork," Susan said. Her voice carried a practiced melodic lilt, designed to sound maternal, but her eyes remained cold. "Your father and I are very concerned, Claire. We want this wedding to go smoothly. We want you to be happy, but we also have an obligation to protect the Thompson legacy." I stared at the envelope. The Thompson legacy was nothing more than a crumbling real estate firm built on handshake deals and over-leveraged loans. I knew the federal indictment was looming, but Susan played her part with such fervent conviction that a bystander would assume she orchestrated the entire offshore syndicate. She acted like a mastermind pulling the strings. It was a flawless diversion. I slid the pages out of the folder. Susan signaled a passing waiter and ordered me a black coffee without asking my preference. I ignored the intrusion and focused on the text. The header read, "Post-nuptial asset protection and indemnity agreement." I scanned the introductory paragraphs. My mother taught me to read contracts backward. She always said the true cost of any agreement hides in the termination clauses and the liability transfers. I bypassed the standard asset division sections and jumped to page 4. The legal jargon was dense and deliberately confusing. It took me a few moments to decipher the specific phrasing. This document was not a standard prenuptial arrangement designed to protect family wealth. It was a broad power of attorney disguised as a marital safeguard. The clauses contained specific language granting Ethan and my father unilateral authority over my professional holdings. If I placed my signature on the bottom line, I would legally authorize them to pledge my spotless credit profile against the failing commercial properties Robert owned. The contract effectively anchored my certified fraud examiner license to their sinking ship. It would make me the primary guarantor for millions in corporate debt I never authorized. The waiter placed a steaming cup of dark roast in front of me. I picked up the ceramic mug, letting the heat warm my palms. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The brew tasted acidic. I placed the cup down and meticulously slid the pages back into the manila folder. I aligned the edges, making sure they were perfectly straight. "I appreciate your concern, Susan," I said, keeping my facial expression neutral, "but I will not be signing this." I pushed the envelope back across the mahogany surface. Susan glared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. Her curated facade cracked. The maternal lilt vanished from her tone. "You are making a grave mistake," she hissed, leaning forward so her cream blazer brushed the table edge. "You think you are so smart with your corporate auditing job and your pristine little apartment. You forget where you came from. You forget who cleans up your messes." "My messes?" I asked, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. I wanted her to keep talking. I needed to see how far the deception reached. Susan glanced around the cafe. A few patrons at nearby tables turned their heads, drawn by the sudden shift in volume. She lowered her voice, but the hostility remained sharp. "We are paying for a 200-guest reception at the most exclusive venue in the state," Susan stated, her jaw tight. "If you refuse to protect this family, Robert will pull the funding today. I will call the caterers. I will cancel the florist. I will strip that country club reservation so fast your head will spin. You will get married in a municipal courthouse wearing a cheap dress." I let her empty threats hang in the air. The wedding venue was irrelevant. The $80,000 budget was already draining into a Cayman Islands trust account. Canceling the reception was just another manipulation tactic. I maintained my calm demeanor. My silence infuriated her further. "You are an ungrateful brat." Susan snapped her composure, fracturing entirely. She slapped her palm onto the table, rattling the porcelain saucers. "Robert gave you everything. He shielded you from the consequences of your own reckless behavior. Do you really think Ethan would stay with you if he knew the truth? Do you think any respectable man wants a wife with your unstable background?" "My unstable background," I echoed. "Do not play coy with me." Susan spat. She leaned closer. Her eyes narrowed into accusatory slits. "I was there. I remember the frantic phone calls. I remember Robert draining his personal savings to bail you out of juvenile detention when you were 18. He kept your record sealed. He bought your clean slate. You owe your father your life. The least you can do is sign a piece of paper to ensure his business survives this temporary rough patch." The cafe faded into a muted hum. The ambient noise of clinking silverware and distant conversations dissolved into static. I stared at the woman sitting across from me. My pulse steadied into a slow, rhythmic beat. I was never arrested at 18. I never stepped foot inside a juvenile detention center. I spent that entire year sitting beside my mother in a sterile oncology ward, holding her thin hand while she faded away. I never broke a single law. Yet Susan believed every word she just spoke. The conviction in her eyes was genuine. She was not the mastermind of this criminal enterprise. She was just another pawn operating under a fabricated reality. The true scope of the betrayal crystallized in my mind. The gaslighting was systemic and deeply rooted. My father did not just invent a quick lie to scare Ethan. Last night, Robert Thompson spent the last 14 years building an intricate fictional narrative about my character. He convinced his new wife, his social circle, and my future husband that I was a troubled delinquent who required constant supervision and financial bailouts. He engineered a fake criminal past to justify his iron grip on my life and to mask his own illicit activities. He played the role of the suffering savior while picking my pockets. I stood up from the leather booth. I picked up my purse and looked down at my stepmother. She was still breathing heavy, her face flushed with righteous indignation. "Cancel the country club, Susan," I said. "Keep the deposits. I have a feeling Robert is going to need the cash." I turned and walked out of the historic cafe, stepping back into the damp coastal air. The cold wind off the Atlantic cleared my head. I walked to my car and unlocked the door. I sat behind the steering wheel, gripping the leather rim. My father created a phantom criminal record to control my narrative. I needed to know exactly how he forged the lie and where the paper trail originated. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and checked the operating hours for the state archives in Concord. Ethan thought he held the upper hand with his offshore router. Susan thought she won the argument by threatening a party. They both underestimated the core nature of my profession. A forensic auditor does not argue with rumors. We pull the original receipts. I started the engine and merged onto the westbound highway. The hunt for my own fake criminal history had just begun, and I knew precisely where to dig. The coastal storm cleared by noon, leaving a bitter, overcast sky as I drove north on Interstate 93. The highway stretched toward the state capitol, cutting through dense lines of dark pine trees. My grip on the leather steering wheel remained loose but intentional. I needed cold facts. Rumors and cafe threats were distractions. I parked my car near the State Archives building in Concord. The structure resembled a concrete fortress designed to protect municipal history from the elements. I walked up the granite steps and pulled open the heavy glass doors. The interior hummed with climate control systems. The air smelled of aged paper and binding glue. I bypassed the civilian reference desks and approached the restricted records counter. A tired clerk asked for my state identification. I did not hand over a standard driver license. I presented my federal auditing badge and requested terminal access to the historical commercial registry. The clerk verified my credentials with a quick scan and pointed toward a row of isolated computers in a dimly lit back room. I chose a terminal in the far corner. The leather chair creaked as I sat down. I typed my own Social Security number into the primary search field. The system churned through years of tax filings. Standard wage forms appeared first. My early accounting internships and entry-level corporate jobs populated the screen. The financial history looked pristine until an anomaly surfaced. A business registration dated 14 years ago flashed in red text. 14 years ago, I was 18 years old. My mother had just lost her battle with cancer. I spent that entire autumn trapped in a thick fog of mourning. I rarely left my childhood bedroom. My father handled all the funeral arrangements and the estate paperwork. He frequently handed me stacks of documents telling me to sign on various dotted lines to process the life insurance payouts. I trusted him implicitly. I was a grieving teenager seeking guidance from her only remaining parent. I opened the digitized corporate file. The header displayed the name Granite State Commercial Contractors. The listed primary owner and chief executive was Claire Thompson. I stared at the glowing monitor. I never owned a construction firm. I pulled the corresponding financial history to trace the operational footprint. The ledger revealed a company hemorrhaging cash from the moment of inception. Within 6 months of incorporation, the business defaulted on $400,000 in vendor debt. I dug deeper into the federal tax implications. The staggering default triggered an immediate inquiry from the Internal Revenue Service. A penalty flag dropped onto the corporate account, holding the primary owner personally liable. The debt was eventually settled for pennies on the dollar through a quiet liquidation process. The government closed the case as a civil tax settlement, not a criminal embezzlement trial. My pulse thumped a slow, steady rhythm in my ears. Robert did not just invent a quick story to scare Ethan. My father committed felony identity theft against his own grieving daughter. He used my name and my unblemished credit to bankrupt a failing construction project, dodging his furious creditors. When the tax penalty flag appeared, he buried the paperwork and spun a masterful psychological lie. He told Susan and his elite social circle that I was arrested for stealing. He played the heroic patriarch, bailing out a delinquent child. He weaponized a civil tax penalty that he caused, turning it into a fictitious, sealed criminal record to keep me under his thumb forever. I needed to see the original incorporation signatures. I navigated to the scanned image of the founding charter. My forged signature sat on the bottom line. The handwriting mimicking my teenage scrawl was an exact match to my father's distinct penmanship. A commercial registration requires a secondary witness to file the articles of incorporation. A licensed attorney of record must certify the documentation. I zoomed in on the bottom right corner of the digital page. The ink displayed a sharp, sprawling cursive. Underneath the signature, the printed name read, Arthur Prescott, Senior Partner at Prescott and Associates. Arthur Prescott was Ethan's father. He retired 5 years ago after a lucrative career as a corporate tax attorney. The revelation hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. The rot was not a recent development. It was generational. Robert and Arthur orchestrated this fraud together 14 years ago. My relationship with Ethan was never a coincidence. We met at a charity gala 3 years ago because Ethan specifically sought me out. Our entire romance was a calculated corporate merger. The sons inherited the sins of the fathers. They recognized my professional trajectory and decided to use my pristine auditing credentials to wash their dirty offshore money. I printed hard copies of every pertinent document. I slipped the warm papers into my leather briefcase and walked out of the archives. I drove back to Bedford while the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray. I pulled into my driveway and parked next to Ethan's luxury sedan. I walked through the front door. Ethan stood in the kitchen, preparing a gourmet dinner. He wore an expensive cashmere sweater and an expression of deep concern. He poured a glass of red wine and handed it to me. He asked how my afternoon meeting with Susan went. He wrapped his arm around my waist and kissed my temple. He spoke in soft tones, promising he would protect me from my cruel family. I leaned into his embrace. I forced my voice to tremble. I told him Susan was harsh and that I was terrified of what my father might do next. I played the fragile, broken woman perfectly. Ethan smiled against my hair. It was a self-satisfied smirk hidden from my view, but entirely evident in his relaxed posture. He thought he possessed total control over the situation. I let him play his part for the rest of the week. I endured his patronizing comfort and my father's condescending daily phone calls. I nodded and cried on cue while secretly holding the executioner's axe behind my back. The dramatic irony hung heavy in our home. They treated me like a naive child who needed constant supervision. They did not know the naive child was actively building a federal case against them. The fragile peace shattered on a Thursday morning. I was scrolling through a social media feed while sipping my morning tea. A photograph appeared on my screen that made the blood freeze in my veins. It was my stepsister, Madison. She was smiling for the camera and wearing a specific piece of jewelry that belonged locked inside a bank vault. The financial deception had just crossed a deeply personal line. Ethan stood in the hallway holding the crystal glasses and the open bottle of imported Bordeaux. He wore a tailored suit stripped of its tie, projecting a curated image of relaxed intimacy. He stepped forward and pressed one of the delicate glasses into my hand. The dark red liquid swirled, catching the low ambient light of the living room. He leaned against the doorframe, watching me with an intense, rehearsed affection that made my skin crawl. He repeated his proposition, letting the words hang in the quiet space between us. He wanted to skip the elaborate country club reception. He suggested we pack our bags and fly to Nevada this weekend, just the two of us, a spontaneous, romantic escape from the suffocating pressure of my family. I brought the crystal rim to my lips and took a slow sip. The vintage wine tasted like oak and dark cherries, but swallowed like ash. I did not break eye contact. I let him believe I was genuinely considering his offer. In the world of forensic accounting, timing is the ultimate currency. Fraudsters operate on strict, invisible schedules dictated by impending audits or looming legal actions. Ethan pitching a sudden weekend elopement was not a romantic gesture. It was a tactical acceleration of his timeline. My father and Susan held tickets for a Sunday morning flight to a jurisdiction devoid of extradition treaties. The Department of Justice unseals federal indictments on Monday mornings. The window of opportunity was rapidly closing. If I agreed to board a plane to Las Vegas and marry Ethan by Friday night, the legal paradigm would shift irreversibly. A marriage certificate acts as a binding financial contract. If we exchanged vows before the weekend ended, the liability waiver he presented the night before would trigger immediately. The postnuptial clauses hidden within that document would tether my pristine credit profile to his toxic offshore syndicates. I would inherit the legal fallout of the Granite State commercial contractors' collapse and the Apex Holdings laundering scheme. Beyond the financial devastation, an early wedding provided Ethan with an impenetrable legal shield. The federal court system respects a concept known as adverse spousal testimony privilege. A prosecutor cannot compel a wife to take the witness stand and testify against her husband in a criminal proceeding. If Ethan secured the marriage certificate before the FBI raided his banking firm, I would be silenced by law. I could possess all the evidence in the world regarding his Cayman Islands routing numbers and his complicity in my identity theft. The moment I became Claire Prescott, that evidence would become legally inadmissible. He was trying to lock me inside a soundproof vault. While Ethan painted a vivid picture of a moonlit desert ceremony, his attention drifted. He placed his wine glass on the hallway console and pulled his smartphone from his trousers. The screen illuminated his face in a pale blue glow. He tapped the glass surface with his thumb, swiping down to refresh an application. "Just checking the scores," Ethan murmured, offering a dismissive half-smile. "The playoffs are ruining my bracket this year." He angled the device slightly away from my line of sight, but the reflection cast onto the hallway mirror betrayed him. I have analyzed countless digital interfaces during corporate embezzlement investigations. The application glowing on his screen did not display basketball scores or sports betting odds. The user interface featured a stark dark mode background layered with rapid green and red numerical tickers. It showcased distinct cryptographic hash identifiers. Ethan was looking at a decentralized blockchain ledger. He was monitoring a live tracker for his offshore cryptocurrency wallet. The Cayman Islands trust account was merely a temporary holding tank. He was actively converting the stolen wedding budget and my father's liquidated assets into untraceable digital currency. The panic he feigned the previous night was gone, replaced by the nervous energy of a thief watching his getaway vehicle fuel up. He needed the money digitized and secured before the federal hammer fell, and he needed me legally paralyzed to ensure a clean exit. I lowered my wine glass. I needed to decline his offer without raising his suspicions. I had to play the role of the sentimental traditional daughter who clung to the illusion of a perfect family. "Vegas sounds like a dream," I said, softening my voice to a gentle whisper. "It would be so easy to just run away from all of this noise, to leave Susan and her country club politics behind us." Ethan exhaled a visible breath of relief. He took a step closer, reaching out to cup my cheek. "We can book the flights right now," he urged. "I can have a car waiting for us in the morning." I placed my hand over his and gently pulled his fingers away from my face. I offered him a sad, wistful smile. "No," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly steady. "I cannot do that." Ethan froze. "Ethan." His hand remained suspended in the air for a fraction of a second before dropping back to his side. "Claire," he started, his voice tightening. "We just discussed how toxic this environment is for you." I know I interrupted, stepping past him into the kitchen, but my mother dreamed of this day. She spent hours talking about my wedding when she was sick in the hospital. She wanted me to have the grand ceremony, the string quartet, the white dress. She wanted my father to walk me down the aisle and hand me over to the man I love. I turned to face him, leaning against the granite island. "I want the 200 guests." I continued, channeling every ounce of fake emotion I could summon. "I want to stand at the altar in front of everyone we know. I want Robert to walk me down that aisle. It is the only way I can feel close to my mother. If we run away to a chapel in the desert, I will regret it for the rest of my life. We are keeping the date, Ethan. We are doing this right." Ethan stared at me. The carefully constructed mask of the supportive fiancé fractured. A distinct twitch developed near the corner of his left eye. His jaw clenched so hard the muscles jumped beneath his skin. He expected a terrified woman eager to escape her overbearing family. He received an immovable brick wall disguised in white lace. He could not argue against the memory of my dead mother. Any protest would shatter the compassionate character he worked so hard to establish. He was trapped by his own deception, of course, Ethan managed to say. The words sounded hollow. He picked up his wine glass and took a deep, erratic gulp. "You are right. We will do it your way. The big ceremony just like you planned." He turned and walked toward the master bedroom, claiming he needed to answer a late email from a client. His footsteps sounded heavy against the hardwood floor. I remained in the kitchen, listening to the bedroom door click shut. The tension in the house felt thick enough to shatter glass. I had effectively locked them into their own theatrical production. Robert and Susan would have to attend the Saturday ceremony to maintain their flight cover story. Ethan would have to stand at the altar without the protection of a signed liability waiver. I forced all the players to remain on the stage until the final act. I poured the remaining expensive wine down the stainless steel sink and rinsed the crystal glass. Ethan thought he could outmaneuver an auditor by altering the schedule. He failed to realize I was already drafting the final report. I walked into my home office and locked the heavy wooden door behind me. I booted up my secondary workstation. I needed to see exactly how much money Ethan was moving through that encrypted application. I could not access his phone directly, but I knew every device in this house connected to the shared wireless router. If I wanted to dismantle his offshore syndicate, I needed to strike at the heart of his digital fortress. I opened a network infiltration protocol and prepared to dive into his hidden cloud drive. The digital clock on my secondary monitor shifted to 2 a.m. The house was silent. The earlier rainstorm had passed, leaving behind a heavy stillness that settled over the neighborhood. Down the hall, the master bedroom door remained shut. I could hear the faint rhythmic sound of Ethan breathing. His deep, even sleep patterns belonged to a man who believed his deceptions were secure. I sat in the glow of my screens, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan. My home office served as a sanctuary. The walls were lined with reference manuals on corporate tax law and international banking regulations. I placed my hands on the mechanical keyboard. The keys offered a satisfying tactile resistance as I initiated a network infiltration protocol. Ethan kept his personal cloud drive guarded behind a dual-layer authentication wall. He was a proficient investment banker, but he lacked the sophisticated technical background required to defeat a certified fraud examiner operating on the same local area network. I did not need his passwords. I only needed to capture the session tokens his smartphone generated when he connected to the household wireless router. I launched a packet sniffer. The diagnostic tool acts like a digital net, catching the invisible data streams flowing through the air. Lines of hexadecimal code cascaded across my primary monitor. I watched the text scroll, isolating the specific data packets originating from his device. It took 20 minutes of patient observation to reconstruct a valid session key. Once the software compiled the token, I bypassed his login screen entirely and dropped straight into the root directory of his remote storage. The surface of his cloud drive appeared unremarkable. I navigated through mundane folders containing tax returns, property insurance documents, and endless spreadsheets tracking municipal bond yields. He kept a dedicated directory for our wedding planning, filled with catering menus and floral arrangement contracts. It was a pristine digital facade built to withstand a casual inspection. Forensic auditing requires looking for the negative space. You do not search for what is there, you hunt for what is missing. I ran a structural analysis on the cloud storage partition. The directory displayed 50 gigabytes of allocated space, but the visible files only accounted for 10. A hidden vault existed beneath the surface, disguised as fragmented system cache. I deployed a decryption script designed to force open concealed digital containers. The software worked tirelessly, grinding through potential cryptographic keys. A progress bar slowly crawled from left to right. When the vault unlocked, the screen refreshed to display a single unlabeled folder. I opened it. The directory contained thousands of exported email chains and scanned PDF attachments. I sorted the files by chronological date. The earliest correspondence originated 36 months ago. I clicked on the oldest email thread. The sender was Ethan. The recipient was my father, Robert Thompson. The subject line read, "Granite State Commercial Contractors Inquiry." My chest tightened. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk to steady my trembling hands. I began to read the exchange. Ethan did not write like an eager young banker seeking a mentor. His tone was surgical, polite, and venomous. He attached the same forged LLC incorporation documents I found at the state archives. Ethan informed my father that while conducting a routine risk assessment for a mutual client, he stumbled upon an alarming irregularity regarding the tax history of Robert's daughter. Ethan detailed the exact mechanics of the identity theft. He outlined the fraudulent signature, the deliberate default, and the subsequent secret tax settlement. My father replied 4 hours later. His response was frantic and disjointed. Robert offered to pay Ethan a staggering consulting fee to delete the findings and maintain confidentiality. Ethan declined the cash offer. The next email contained his true demand. Ethan recognized that Robert was quietly funneling money out of his failing real estate developments. Ethan wanted a seat at the table. He demanded equity in Apex Holdings. He mandated that his banking firm would become the primary registered agent for all future offshore routing. He used the proof of my forged teenage signature as leverage to extort his way into a lucrative criminal syndicate. The narrative I constructed over the past 24 hours fractured and collapsed. I had assumed Ethan was a greedy subordinate following the orders of a corrupt patriarch. I was wrong. The dynamic flowed in the exact opposite direction. My father was a desperate failing crook, backed into a corner. Ethan was the apex predator. Ethan was the architect of the entire offshore laundering pipeline. He blackmailed his way into the Thompson family enterprise and stripped my father of his operational control. I clicked through the subsequent months of correspondence. I watched their relationship evolve from hostile extortion into a streamlined corporate partnership. Ethan streamlined this Cayman's routing protocol. He advised Robert on which domestic assets to liquidate. He orchestrated the pawn shop bridge loan using my mother's sapphire pendant. Then I found an email dated 28 months ago. The contents hit me with the force of a physical blow. Robert complained that utilizing offshore trusts carried a high risk of future federal audits. Ethan replied with a chilling solution. He told my father he had a plan to secure a permanent, impenetrable shield against regulatory scrutiny. Ethan stated he intended to court the daughter. I stared at the glowing pixels until my vision blurred. I met Ethan at a charity gala benefiting pediatric research 28 months ago. He approached me near the bar holding 2 glasses of champagne. Another guest bumped his shoulder, causing the wine to spill onto my silk dress. He was profoundly apologetic, charming, and charismatic. He paid for the dry cleaning. He asked me to dinner to make amends. He courted me with expensive reservations, thoughtful gifts, and endless patience. He proposed to me on a snowy evening in Boston, sliding a diamond ring onto my finger while promising a lifetime of devotion. None of it was real. The spilled champagne was a calculated tactic. The romantic dinners were business meetings. The marriage proposal was a hostile corporate takeover. Ethan engineered our entire relationship from the very first spoken word. He identified my certified fraud examiner license as the ultimate asset. He needed a spouse possessing pristine auditing credentials to legitimize his stolen millions. The wedding was merely the final signature required to merge his criminal enterprise with my spotless reputation. The emotional weight of this absolute betrayal settled heavy in my stomach. The man sleeping down the hall did not love me. He never loved me. I was a human shield. I was a tool designed to absorb the impact of a federal indictment while he escaped with the capital. Grief is a dangerous luxury during an active investigation. A normal bride would scream. She would march into the bedroom, turn on the lights, and hurl accusations. But I am not a normal bride. True to my profession, I compartmentalized the pain. I locked the grief away in a dark corner of my mind and focused entirely on the raw data. I highlighted every single file in the hidden directory. I connected an encrypted external hard drive to my workstation and initiated a mass transfer. I watched the status window as terabytes of extortion material wire transfer receipts and confessed criminal strategies cloned onto my physical device. I gathered the evidence needed to send the man I thought I loved to federal prison for a very long time. The progress bar hit 100%, the transfer completed. I secured the external drive and disconnected the cable. Before I could close the network analyzer window, a new notification flashed across my secondary monitor. The software detected an unauthorized internal query. A device operating on my home wireless network was actively attempting to ping the secure server where I stored my proprietary firm data. I checked the source origin. The physical hardware address belonged to Ethan's smartphone. He was not asleep. He was lying in the dark a few rooms away, trying to break through my professional firewall. The realization sparked a cold, calculated energy in my veins. The architect thought he could outmaneuver the auditor in her own domain. He was probing the perimeter, searching for weaknesses to exploit before the wedding. It was time to invite him inside. The crimson alert box pulsing on my secondary monitor shattered the quiet rhythm of my late-night investigation. A localized intrusion warning indicated an active breach attempt. Someone operating within the physical boundaries of my home network was knocking against the encrypted gates of my firm. The diagnostic tracker isolated the hardware signature. It belonged to the tablet Ethan kept on his bedside table. He was not sleeping. He was hunting. The psychological warfare had shifted into a new arena. Ethan understood the impending marriage would grant him a legal shield against my testimony, but he remained vulnerable to the raw data stored on my professional servers. If my firm possessed an ongoing audit file detailing his offshore syndicates, the marriage certificate would not save him from a corporate subpoena. He needed to ensure no digital paper trail connected his banking institution to Robert's shell companies before we exchanged vows. He wanted to sanitize the crime scene. A novice cybersecurity protocol involves immediately blocking a hostile IP address. You sever the connection, lock the doors, and change the administrative passwords. But a seasoned forensic investigator knows that blocking a persistent threat only forces the attacker to change tactics. If I locked Ethan out, he would realize I was awake and monitoring the network. He would adapt his strategy. I needed him to remain confident. I needed him to believe his late-night espionage was succeeding. Instead of raising the drawbridge, I decided to build him a labyrinth. I initiated a virtualization script on my host machine. In the realm of network security, this countermeasure is known as a honeypot. It is a digital terrarium. The software spins up a fake isolated server designed to look identical to the primary vault. It mirrors the file structures, replicates the naming conventions, and simulates the exact latency of a legitimate database. A honeypot acts as a decoy, drawing the attacker away from the sensitive material while trapping them inside a controlled sandbox. I needed convincing bait. Ethan was a meticulous financial operator. A simple empty folder would trigger his suspicion. He was searching for proof that his laundering pipeline had been discovered. I decided to give him the exact opposite. I opened a blank document editor and began drafting a fabricated memorandum. Utilizing my extensive familiarity with federal regulatory formatting, I recreated official government letterhead. I typed out a fictional communique originating from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The language needed to be sterile, bureaucratic, and deeply reassuring to a guilty man. I crafted a summary report detailing a preliminary inquiry into Apex Holdings and the Granite State Commercial Contractors default. In the concluding paragraph, I wrote that the Regulatory Commission found insufficient evidentiary support to pursue a formal indictment. I stamped the digital file with a fake routing number and marked the status as case closed. I backdated the memorandum to 48 hours ago. I saved the file as a PDF and dropped it into a folder labeled Urgent Pending Disclosures. The trap was set. I toggled the firewall settings on my primary router. I created a narrow, intentional vulnerability, redirecting his incoming connection requests away from my authentic work servers and straight into the waiting sandbox. The notification flashed green. The perimeter breach was successful. He was inside. I leaned back in my leather chair, watching a live mirror of his session on my screen. A blinking cursor represented his presence as he navigated through the fabricated directories. His movements were frantic at first. He clicked through dummy folders containing generic tax codes and blank employee rosters. He was searching for his own name. He was hunting for the Apex Holdings moniker. After 4 minutes of digital scavenging, he found the bait. The cursor hovered over the Urgent Pending Disclosures folder. He clicked the icon. The fabricated IRS memorandum opened on his device. I slipped out of my chair. My bare feet made no sound against the hardwood floor. I needed to see his physical reaction. I wanted to witness the exact moment the lie took root in his mind. I walked down the dark hallway, keeping my shoulder close to the wall to avoid the creaking floorboards. I passed the master bedroom. The door was ajar, and the bed was empty. A faint blue glow spilled onto the carpet from the adjacent living room. I paused at the edge of the archway, concealing myself in the deep shadows. Ethan sat on the edge of the white linen sofa. His posture was rigid. He balanced the tablet on his knees, his face illuminated by the harsh light of the screen. He was reading the document I had just forged. I watched his eyes dart back and forth across the lines of text. The tension held his shoulders high near his ears. He reached the bottom of the page where the fictional investigator declared the case closed. The transformation was immediate. Ethan dropped his head back against the sofa cushions. He let out a long, shuddering sigh that echoed through the quiet house. It was the distinct sound of a man who believed the guillotine had just swung past his neck and missed. He ran a hand over his face, wiping away the accumulated sweat of his own paranoia. A slow, genuine smile spread across his features. He thought he outsmarted the system. He believed his offshore empire was safe from federal scrutiny and that his impending marriage would secure his stolen fortune forever. He locked the tablet screen, plunging the living room back into darkness. He stood up from the sofa. I pressed myself flat against the hallway wall, holding my breath. Ethan walked past my hiding spot, his footsteps light and unburdened. He disappeared into the master bedroom and climbed under the heavy duvet. Within minutes, his breathing returned to a deep, rhythmic slumber. He slept the peaceful sleep of the victorious. I remained in the shadows for a long time, letting the silence wash over me. The dramatic irony of the situation tasted sharper than the cold night air. Ethan went to bed smiling, entirely unaware of the hidden mechanism embedded within the honeypot. A decoy server does not simply distract an attacker, it gathers intelligence. The moment Ethan clicked on the fabricated PDF, a background script executed automatically. The software packaged his device signature, his exact geographic IP location, and a time-stamped log of his unauthorized intrusion. Before he even finished reading the first paragraph of the fake IRS clearance, my system had encrypted that data packet. Utilizing a secure threat-sharing protocol established for licensed fraud examiners, my server transmitted the digital envelope directly to a secure Dropbox maintained by the FBI Cyber Division. Ethan thought he was erasing his footprints. Instead, he provided the federal authorities with a pristine, verified log of his espionage. He handed the investigators the exact probable cause required to secure a physical search warrant for his downtown banking firm. The evidence was no longer just a collection of suspicious routing numbers. It was a documented cybercrime. I walked back into my home office and shut down the virtualization software. The digital battlefield was secure. The offshore ledgers, the extortion emails, and the intrusion logs were all safely locked behind my encryption keys. The trap was fully loaded, and the prey was comfortably resting inside the cage. But a cornered syndicate does not rely on a single defensive strategy. As the sun began to rise, painting the New Hampshire sky in pale shades of morning gray, the psychological warfare shifted from the digital realm to the social arena. My father and Ethan were operating under a false sense of security, but Susan was a different kind of variable. She thrived on chaos and public manipulation. My mobile phone vibrated against the wooden desk. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. The caller identification displayed the name of my maid of honor. The screen lit up with a rapid succession of frantic text messages. The carefully managed silence of the past few days had shattered. A new threat was emerging, and it was targeting the only thing I had left to protect. My reputation was under fire. The vibration of my mobile phone rattling against the wooden desk broke the stillness of the early morning. I looked at the illuminated screen. The caller identification displayed the name Jessica. She was my oldest friend and the designated maid of honor for the impending ceremony. Instead of a single phone call, a rapid sequence of text messages began flooding the notification banner. The carefully managed silence of my household had fractured. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. Jessica was frantic. Her texts consisted of broken sentences and panicked questions, asking if I was in legal trouble and demanding to know what was happening. She forwarded a string of messages originating from a newly created group chat. Susan had initiated the digital ambush at 6 in the morning. She added every single bridesmaid to a private thread. I scrolled through the transcript. My stepmother crafted her opening statement with the practiced precision of a seasoned socialite. She addressed the bridal party with a tone of heavy manufactured sorrow. Susan claimed she was breaking her silence because she feared for the integrity of the wedding. She wrote that I was currently the target of a severe federal inquiry conducted by the Securities and Exchange Commission. She painted a tragic picture framing Ethan as a valiant and loyal partner who was bravely standing by my side despite my alleged financial crimes. She begged the bridesmaids to remain supportive, but advised them to keep the information confidential to avoid triggering my supposed mental instability. Attached to the bottom of her message was a digital document file. I opened the attachment. It was a fabricated subpoena bearing a clumsy digital watermark from a regulatory agency. To a layman, the dense legal jargon and the official-looking seals might appear intimidating. To a certified fraud examiner, the forgery was amateurish. The font spacing was inconsistent, and the statutory citations referenced outdated municipal codes rather than active federal law. Susan did not possess the technical skills to forge a convincing legal document. She likely paid a desperate online freelancer to generate the fake PDF. She was acting on raw panic. Although Robert believed his upcoming escape was secure, his erratic behavior over the past few weeks had clearly unsettled his wife. Susan thrived on country club gossip and elite status. She sensed the incoming storm. She knew Robert was hoarding cash and booking sudden international flights. She decided to preemptively destroy my credibility. If the authorities intervened or if I attempted to expose their syndicate, Susan wanted the social circle to view me as a lying criminal attempting to deflect blame. My phone vibrated again. Another bridesmaid sent a message asking if we needed to secure a defense attorney. A lesser person would have responded immediately. A normal bride would have typed a furious defense flooding the group chat with denials and counter-accusations. She would have called Susan and screamed into the receiver. I did none of those things. Explaining the truth to a panicked audience only validates the initial lie. I engaged the silent mode on my device and placed it face down on the desk. Let them talk. Gossip is a fragile weapon when positioned against cold federal warrants. I walked into the master bathroom and turned on the shower. I stood under the scalding water, letting the heat loosen the tension in my neck. I dressed in a tailored navy blue suit and tied my hair back into a severe practical knot. I bypassed the kitchen, avoiding the risk of waking Ethan. I walked out to my car and started the engine. I drove away from Bedford, heading toward a nondescript commercial district on the outskirts of Concord. The federal government rarely operates out of glamorous buildings. The regional field office for the Federal Bureau of Investigation occupied the second floor of a drab brick structure situated between a dental clinic and a regional insurance provider. There were no flashing lights or imposing seals on the exterior doors. I parked my vehicle and entered the lobby. After presenting my professional credentials and submitting to a thorough security screening, an armed receptionist escorted me into a stark windowless conference room. A metal table anchored the center of the space. 2 gray synthetic chairs sat on opposite sides. A man entered the room holding a thick manila folder. Special Agent David Harris possessed the weary demeanor of a law enforcement officer who spent too many years untangling the webs of white-collar criminals. His suit was practical rather than expensive. He sat across from me and placed the folder on the metal surface. "Miss Thompson," Harris said, his voice rough and direct. "We received the intrusion logs your system forwarded last night. The Cybersecurity Division verified the packet data. You handed us the exact probable cause we needed to authorize the search warrants for Ethan Prescott and his banking firm." "I am glad the honeypot functioned as designed," I replied. Harris unclasped the folder. "We have been tracking your father for 18 months. The Granite State commercial contractor's default was a dead end until your recent data submissions connected the offshore dots. Robert Thompson is a flight risk. We flagged his passport and monitored the airline manifests. We are mobilizing a tactical response team. We plan to execute simultaneous raids on Robert's corporate headquarters and Ethan's downtown firm tomorrow morning at dawn, Friday morning. The timeline did not align with my strategy. I reached into the pocket of my navy blazer and extracted a standard black encrypted thumb drive. I placed it on the metal table, pushing it halfway across the divide. "You cannot raid their offices on Friday," I stated. Harris frowned. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "We do not let civilian informants dictate operational schedules. The suspects are liquidating assets. We move tomorrow to prevent capital flight. If you move tomorrow, you will lose the money," I countered. I kept my gaze locked on his eyes. Ethan is the architect of the laundering pipeline. He does not keep the stolen funds in traditional offshore accounts. He converts the capital into decentralized cryptocurrency using a dark web exchange. He controls the digital wallets through complex cryptographic seed phrases. I tapped the black thumb drive resting on the table. This drive contains the master ledger. I explained it holds the transaction histories, the extortion emails, and the exact digital pathways Ethan utilizes to hide the wealth, but the drive is protected by military-grade encryption. If you break down his office doors on a Friday morning, the news will hit the wire instantly. Ethan will trigger a remote wipe protocol. He will transfer the digital tokens to cold storage, swallow the physical recovery keys, and the millions of dollars will vanish permanently. Harris stared at the thumb drive. The rigid structure of the American justice system demands clear evidence. Recovering stolen assets is paramount in financial crime prosecutions. He knew the limitations of federal cyber units when facing a decentralized blockchain blackout. "What are your terms?" Harris asked. "Delay the raids by 48 hours, I demanded. Let the wedding proceed." Harris scoffed. "You want us to sit on our hands while these men attend a country club gala?" "I want them contained," I corrected. "If you wait until Saturday afternoon, you achieve a tactical advantage. Robert and Susan will be surrounded by 200 guests. They cannot flee a public venue without causing a chaotic scene. More importantly, Ethan will be standing at an altar. He will not have access to his secure terminals. He will be stripped of his devices and unable to trigger a digital blackout." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cold metal table. "I need them in one room," I said softly. "I need Ethan to sign a specific document before you apply the handcuffs. If you grant me the 48-hour delay, I will hand you the decryption password for this master ledger the moment the ceremony begins. You get the arrests, you recover the stolen funds, and I get to look them in the eye when the house of cards collapses." Harris weighed the tactical logistics. A public arrest at an elite country club carried significant operational risks, but the guarantee of recovering the decentralized assets provided immense leverage. He looked at the encrypted drive and then back at my face. He recognized the cold calculation in my demeanor. I was not a fragile bride seeking vengeance. I was a professional auditor balancing a complex equation. Saturday at 3 o'clock, Harris agreed. He slid the thumb drive across the table and placed it into his jacket pocket. "Do not complicate my crime scene, Miss Thompson. I intend to clarify it," I replied. I stood up and exited the windowless room. The negotiation was successful. The trap was now secured by federal authority. I walked out of the brick building and stepped into the bright afternoon sun. I pulled my phone from my pocket and disabled the silent mode. The notification screen illuminated instantly. The bridesmaid group chat was still a chaotic mess of rumors and panicked speculation. Susan was continuing her relentless smear campaign. I swiped past the group messages and noticed a single missed call. It did not originate from Jessica or any of the other wedding attendants. The missed connection came from my stepsister. Madison left a voicemail. I pressed the device to my ear. Her voice sounded broken and breathless. The curated arrogance she typically projected was entirely absent. She was sobbing. She stated her elite credit card declined at a boutique, and a collection agency just called her personal cell phone demanding $3 million. The protective bubble surrounding the golden child had burst. A new and unexpected variable was entering the final equation. I rented a suite at a downtown hotel for the final days leading up to the wedding. I needed a secure command center away from Ethan and the stifling atmosphere of the Bedford house. The room featured wide bay windows overlooking the city skyline and a heavy mahogany desk perfectly suited for finalizing my investigation. I sat by the window watching the afternoon traffic flow when the sudden frantic knocking began at the solid wood door. I checked the peephole. Madison stood in the hallway. Her designer mascara ran in dark streaks down her cheeks. She wore an expensive silk blouse, wrinkled and untucked, contrasting sharply with the flawless image she normally projected. She gripped a silver laptop against her chest, like a physical shield. I opened the door. She pushed past me without an invitation and collapsed onto the edge of the plush sofa. The golden child was shattered. For years, Madison navigated our family dynamic with a polished cruelty. Susan raised her to view me as a flawed, stubborn outsider who refused to conform to their elite social standards. Madison happily embraced the role of the favored daughter, enjoying the lavish allowances and the imported luxury cars my father provided. She looked down on my accounting career, viewing it as a tedious, unglamorous pursuit. Now the unglamorous auditor was the only person she could run to. My card declined. Madison gasped, her voice trembling. I was at a boutique in the mall. The cashier swiped the black card and it flashed an invalid code. I called the concierge desk to override the block, and they told me the account was frozen by an external judicial order. I walked over to the minibar, poured a glass of water, and handed it to her. She took it with shaking hands, spilling drops onto her silk blouse. A collection agency called my cell phone. 10 minutes later, she continued, her breath catching in her throat. They were screaming at me, Claire. They demanded immediate payment for outstanding municipal liens. They said they were initiating asset seizure protocols. What liens, I asked, keeping my tone clinical and detached. Madison set the water glass on the coffee table. Last year, Robert asked me to sign a stack of corporate registration forms. He said he needed to structure a new holding company for tax benefits. He told me it was a routine procedure to diversify the family portfolio. He made me the primary executive officer. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing more tears down her face. The debt collector said the holding company owes $3 million to regional concrete suppliers and electrical contractors, Madison whispered. They said, I am personally liable for the entire amount because my name is on the operating charter. I do not have $3 million. I only receive the monthly allowance Robert deposits. I do not even know what this company builds. The precision of Robert's cruelty was breathtaking. He utilized my Social Security number when I was 18 to bankrupt a project and dodge his creditors. 14 years later, he repeated the exact same maneuver using his pampered stepdaughter. He placed Madison at the helm of a toxic commercial entity, ensuring she would absorb the catastrophic financial impact when the business inevitably defaulted. Robert insulated himself from the legal fallout by exploiting the trust of the women in his life. I pulled a high-back chair away from the mahogany desk and sat opposite the sofa. I needed to deliver the final blow to shatter her remaining illusions. The accounts are frozen because the Department of Justice is locking down Robert's domestic assets. I explained, my voice devoid of sympathy. He knew the collapse was imminent. He positioned you as the fall guy for the contractor liens to buy himself time. Madison shook her head rapidly, rejecting the reality. No, Susan would never allow him to do that to me. My mother protects me. Well, your mother leaked a fabricated federal subpoena to my bridesmaids this morning, I countered. She is actively trying to frame me for financial crimes to create a public distraction. And while she is busy running that smear campaign, she and Robert are finalizing their exit strategy. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. They hold 2 first-class tickets for an international flight departing Logan Airport on Sunday morning, I said, watching her eyes widen in horror. The destination is a sovereign jurisdiction that does not honor United States extradition requests. They are leaving the country. Madison, they plan to attend the wedding reception on Saturday, shake hands with the local politicians, and then quietly vanish before dawn. They are abandoning you to face the $3 million debt and a guaranteed federal prison sentence. The betrayal broke her completely. The realization that her mother traded her freedom for a luxurious escape overseas drained the remaining fight from her posture. The curated arrogance, the sneering condescension, and the years of elite entitlement evaporated, leaving behind a terrified 25-year-old holding a computer. Madison set the silver laptop on the glass coffee table. She opened the lid and navigated past the login screen. Susan is not smart, Madison said, her voice dropping to a hollow monotone. She does not understand how digital security works. She uses the same simple password for all her devices. When Robert started acting paranoid last month, I noticed Susan obsessively updating a specific spreadsheet. She kept the file hidden on this local hard drive. I downloaded a copy to my desktop before I left the house. She turned the screen toward me. I do not know how to read these numbers, Claire, Madison whispered, but I think this is what you are looking for. I pulled the laptop closer. My eyes scanned the digital grid. This was not a collection of vague emails or circumstantial routing codes. This was the holy grail of forensic auditing. It was the physical master ledger Susan maintained to track Robert's offshore transfers. Susan documented every single transaction, detailing the specific dates, the initial dollar amounts, and the destination nodes. She tracked the money flowing from Robert's liquidating real estate firm into Ethan's Cayman Islands pipeline. I connected my encrypted external drive and immediately cloned the file. I needed to verify the arithmetic. An auditor never trusts the spreadsheet without checking the underlying equations. I ran a rapid comparative analysis, cross-referencing the initial deposit amount Susan recorded against the finalized destination sums I extracted from Ethan's hidden cloud vault. The numbers did not align. A glaring discrepancy emerged within the digital ledger. Robert authorized massive transfers of capital, expecting the full sums to arrive in the decentralized crypto wallets Ethan managed. However, the final balances sitting in the offshore accounts were consistently lower than the originating deposits. I isolated the variance. Every time Ethan processed a transfer for my father, he skimmed a substantial percentage off the top. The transaction fees he applied were exorbitant, far exceeding standard laundering rates. Ethan was systematically siphoning capital from the syndicate and routing the excess funds into an isolated shadow account registered exclusively under his own name. I highlighted the missing columns and tallied the final sum. The result flashed on the screen: $500,000. Ethan did not just launder the money, he actively robbed his future father-in-law in the process. He extorted Robert into an offshore partnership and then quietly bled the operation dry. There is no honor among thieves, and there is certainly no loyalty within a criminal syndicate. Ethan played the part of the sophisticated financial savior while systematically looting the man he was pretending to protect. I closed the silver laptop and pushed it back across the coffee table. Madison sat shivering on the sofa, staring blankly at the city skyline outside the bay window. She traded the ledger for the truth, but the truth offered zero comfort. "What happens now?" Madison asked, her voice fragile and thin. "Now," I replied, standing up and smoothing the wrinkles from my navy suit. "The trap closes." The federal warrants were secured, the master ledger was verified. The evidence of Ethan's staggering internal theft was documented. I possessed all the ammunition required to dismantle the entire operation, but dropping the hammer from a hotel room was insufficient. The architects of this fraud spent 14 years building a public narrative portraying me as a criminal liability. They manipulated my social circle, they stole my mother's legacy, and they attempted to enslave my professional future. I did not want a quiet legal victory. I wanted a public execution. The timeline accelerated. Tomorrow evening, the entire family would gather in Hanover for the formal rehearsal dinner. Ethan planned to corner me, demanding my signature on the finalized post-nuptial agreement before the wedding day. He expected me to sign away my life while drinking expensive wine surrounded by my peers. He underestimated the bride. I prepared to switch the documents and force him to sign his own financial death warrant. Friday evening descended upon Hanover, bringing a crisp chill to the air. The private dining room inside the historic boutique hotel hummed with the overlapping conversations of 50 affluent guests. Warm amber light spilled from crystal chandeliers, illuminating tables draped in pristine white linen. Waiters navigated the crowded floor, carrying silver trays of roasted lamb and seared scallops. To an outside observer, the gathering represented a harmonious celebration, uniting two prominent local families. Beneath the polished veneer, a toxic undercurrent pulsed through the room. Robert held court near the private mahogany bar. He wore a custom tuxedo projecting the curated image of a wealthy patriarch at the pinnacle of his success. He laughed loud at jokes told by regional politicians, while Susan stood beside him, orchestrating the social dynamics with practiced grace. When the dessert plates arrived, my father stepped toward the center of the room. He picked up a silver fork and tapped the metal against his crystal champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound cut through the ambient chatter, demanding immediate attention. The guests fell silent, turning their expectant faces toward the head table. Robert raised his glass. He cleared his throat, adjusting his posture to convey deep paternal affection. He spoke about the challenges of raising a daughter alone after a tragic loss. He wove a masterful narrative filled with fabricated hardships. He looked directly at me and told the audience how proud he was of my journey. He mentioned my supposed reckless teenage years, framing his own identity theft as my personal failure. He praised me for overcoming a troubled youth to become a respectable professional. The room let out a collective murmur of sympathy and admiration. He painted himself as the forgiving anchor who guided a wayward child back into the light. Ethan sat next to me during the entire speech. When Robert referenced my fictional juvenile delinquency, Ethan reached under the tablecloth and squeezed my hand. He offered a tight, supportive smile, playing the role of a devoted partner, shielding his fragile bride from past shame. The performance was flawless. A month ago, that gentle squeeze would have filled my chest with warmth. Tonight, I felt only the cold calculation behind his grip. I did not pull away. I returned his smile, projecting serene gratitude, while carefully tracking the minutes ticking by on the wall clock. As the guests finished their dessert, and the waiters began pouring dark roast coffee, Ethan leaned close to my ear. He whispered that we needed to handle a minor administrative task before the evening concluded. He stood up and guided me away from the crowded tables, leading me through a set of double doors into a quiet, carpeted hallway. The ambient noise of the party faded behind the heavy wood. Ethan reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and withdrew a sleek, black leather binder. He opened the cover, revealing the final printed version of the post-nuptial agreement. "We need to execute this tonight," Claire Ethan said, his voice dropping to a persuasive murmur. "The lawyers require the signed original on file before the ceremony tomorrow. It secures your protection from Robert's impending financial collapse." He pulled a heavy gold pen from his breast pocket and pressed the cool metal into my palm. He pointed to the yellow sticky note marking the bottom of the final page. He told me to sign right on the dotted line. I held a half-full glass of dark Cabernet Sauvignon in my left hand. I looked at the signature page. Ethan stood close, invading my personal space to maintain psychological pressure. He watched my fingers, expecting immediate compliance. I took a shallow breath and shifted my weight. I deliberately caught the heel of my shoe on the thick hallway rug. I stumbled forward, feigning a sudden loss of balance. My shoulder collided hard against his chest. The wine glass tipped forward. A dark crimson wave cascaded out of the crystal bowl, splashing directly onto the open leather binder. The red liquid saturated the thick legal paper, bleeding across the paragraphs and pooling around the signature lines. The carefully drafted clauses detailing his offshore protection became instantly illegible. Ethan jumped back, gasping as a few drops of wine hit his expensive lapel. He stared at the ruined contract. A raw, unfiltered panic flashed across his features. He needed that specific document executed tonight to build his legal firewall. Without my signature, his entire strategy crumbled. He swore under his breath, swiping futilely at the wet pages with his bare hands. "Oh, Ethan, I am so sorry," I gasped, widening my eyes in exaggerated horror. I grabbed a cloth napkin from a nearby service cart and dabbed at his jacket. I tripped on the rug. "The pages are soaked." He clamped his jaw shut, fighting to maintain his supportive facade, while his eyes darted toward the dining room doors. "It is fine," he forced the words through gritted teeth. "I will call my associate and have him courier a new copy from the downtown office." I placed a calming hand on his forearm. "Do not bother your staff at this hour," I said sweetly. "You emailed me the final PDF draft on Tuesday for my review. The file is saved on my laptop. I can just run upstairs to the Hotel Business Center and print a clean copy right now. It will only take 5 minutes." Ethan exhaled a sharp breath of relief. The tension drained from his rigid posture. "You are amazing," he whispered, kissing my cheek. "Go print it. I will wait right here." I turned and walked toward the elevator bank. My heels clicked a steady, confident rhythm against the marble floor. I rode the car to the mezzanine level and entered the vacant business center. The room contained a single desktop computer and a high-capacity laser printer. I logged into my secure cloud storage. I did not open the post-nuptial draft Ethan sent me. I accessed a separate hidden directory and retrieved a custom file I engineered 2 days ago. During my early years as a forensic auditor, I spent hundreds of hours dissecting fraudulent corporate contracts. I learned how criminals buried devastating clauses within walls of monotonous legal formatting. I reverse-engineered the tactic. The document I opened featured the exact same margins, font styles, and heading structures as Ethan's original agreement. The first 3 pages contained identical boilerplate language regarding asset mediation and marital responsibilities. The trap resided on page 4. I deleted the indemnity clause protecting his offshore assets. In its place, I inserted a legally binding declaration of asset forfeiture. The new paragraph explicitly stated that the signatory voluntarily surrendered all ownership rights to any decentralized digital currency or foreign trust accounts held in their name. It mandated the immediate transfer of those specific funds to a federal victim restitution ledger upon execution. To a hurried reader scanning the text, the paragraph looked like standard banking compliance jargon. To a federal judge, it was an irrevocable confession and a total surrender of stolen capital. I hit the print command. The machine whirred to life, spitting out 10 crisp pages. I gathered the warm sheets of paper and tapped the edges against the desk, ensuring perfect alignment. I stapled the top left corner. I rode the elevator back down to the ground floor. Ethan paced the hallway outside the dining room. He checked his luxury wristwatch twice in the span of 30 seconds. He was exhausted from managing his double life, arrogant in his perceived victory, and desperate to finalize the legal shield before the sun rose. I approached him holding the fresh stack of paper. I opened the black leather binder and placed the ruined wine-soaked pages into a nearby trash receptacle. I slid the newly printed contract into the right side pocket. I handed him the gold pen. "Here is the clean copy," I said, offering a reassuring smile. "We can finally put this behind us." Ethan took the pen. He did not read the first page. He did not verify the indemnity clauses. His hubris blinded him to the possibility that the prey could set a trap for the hunter. He flipped directly to the final sheet. He scribbled his stylized signature across the dotted line, applying a heavy pressure that indented the paper. He closed the binder and handed it back to me. He exhaled a long, victorious sigh, believing he just secured unlimited wealth and a compliant, silent wife. We walked back into the dining room together to join the celebration. The guests raised their glasses to toast our future. They thought they were attending the prologue to a wedding. They did not know the rehearsal dinner was actually a funeral for an offshore empire. Tomorrow afternoon, the sun would shine over the Bedford Country Club and the final reckoning would begin. The afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the immaculate lawns of the Bedford Country Club. The venue represented the pinnacle of New Hampshire high society, featuring manicured gardens, towering oak trees, and a grand ballroom with vaulted ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, 200 guests occupied rows of gilded chairs arranged to form a perfect central aisle. The air smelled of expensive floral arrangements and anticipation. A string quartet situated near the front row played a classical piece, weaving a soft, elegant melody that masked the low hum of whispered conversations. In the bridal suite tucked away on the second floor, Susan paced the room in a state of high anxiety. She wore an elaborate emerald gown, checking her reflection in the full-length mirror every few minutes. She fussed over the bridesmaids, smoothing ribbons and adjusting bouquets. Robert stood near the door, checking his wristwatch. He looked immaculate in his tailored tuxedo, but a fine sheen of sweat coated his forehead. His eyes darted nervously toward the hallway. He was a man watching a ticking clock, counting down the hours until his scheduled international flight. I did not participate in the frantic preparations. I sat quietly in a leather armchair, staring out the window. I did not wear a flowing white gown or a delicate veil. I chose a sharply tailored charcoal gray designer suit. The fabric cut a severe professional silhouette. A simple silk blouse rested underneath the jacket, providing a stark contrast to the dark wool. The only accessory I wore was my mother's sapphire pendant, finally retrieved from the hotel safe where I stored it after confronting Madison. The deep, velvet blue gemstone rested against my collarbone, a silent testament to the legacy I was preparing to defend. Susan finally turned away from the mirror and noticed my attire. She stopped mid-sentence, her mouth falling open in genuine shock. She marched across the room, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She demanded to know where my dress was. She shrieked that I was ruining the aesthetic of the entire ceremony and humiliating the family in front of regional politicians. Robert stepped forward, his face flushing red, urging me to change immediately to avoid a public scandal. I ignored their protests. I stood up, smoothed the lapels of my suit jacket, and walked past them into the hallway. The time for curated optics had expired. The heavy wooden doors leading into the main ballroom remained shut. I stood in the foyer, listening to the string quartet transition into a traditional processional march. The murmurs inside the hall died down. The ushers opened the double doors, revealing the expansive space and the sea of expectant faces. I stepped into the threshold. A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. 200 heads turned toward the entrance. They expected a radiant bride draped in white lace, embodying the delicate image of domestic submission. Instead, they witnessed a corporate auditor walking down the aisle in a charcoal business suit. The contrast shattered their expectations. Confused whispers erupted from the back rows, spreading quickly toward the front. The sound swelled, resembling the low rustle of dry leaves caught in a sudden gust of wind. I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead, ignoring the shifting guests and the wide-eyed stares. I measured my pace, timing each step to the rhythm of the music. Ethan stood at the altar, waiting beneath a towering archway of white roses. He wore a custom midnight blue tuxedo, looking every inch the successful elite banker. But the polished facade fractured as I approached. He noticed the gray suit and the absence of a veil. A deep furrow appeared between his brows. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, visibly uncomfortable with the sudden deviation from the script. He reached up and tugged at the collar of his dress shirt, sweating despite the aggressive air conditioning chilling the room. Robert waited a few paces behind him, assigned to the traditional role of giving the bride away. My father appeared physically ill. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pallid grayish hue. He clutched the program in his hands, gripping the paper tight enough to whiten his knuckles. He recognized the shift in my demeanor. He knew I was not playing the fragile victim anymore. I reached the end of the aisle. The officiant, a local judge hired to lend an air of prestige to the ceremony, offered a polite, confused smile. Ethan stepped forward, extending his right hand. He expected me to take his palm, turning toward the altar, to begin the standard recitation of vows. I did not take his hand. I stepped past him, moving to the center of the raised platform. I turned to face the audience. The 200 guests sat frozen, locked in a tense silence. They sensed the impending collision. The air in the ballroom felt heavy, thick with unspoken questions. I reached into the right pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a small, wireless presentation clicker. I held the black plastic device in my palm, resting my thumb over the primary button. I looked toward the back of the room and caught the eye of the audio-visual technician managing the soundboard. I offered a single sharp nod. The massive digital projector screen positioned directly behind the floral archway hummed to life. The motor whined softly as the white canvas descended, unfurling to dominate the back wall. Ethan had requested the installation of the equipment explicitly to display a romantic photo montage during the reception. He wanted to project images of our fabricated courtship to reinforce his cover story. I hijacked the feed 45 minutes prior, replacing his sentimental slideshow with a very different kind of presentation. I picked up the primary microphone resting on the wooden podium. I tapped the metal grill twice to ensure the sound system was active. The sharp thumps echoed off the vaulted ceilings, cutting through the lingering whispers. "Thank you all for gathering here this afternoon." I announced, my voice perfectly level, projecting a calm, clinical authority. "You were invited to witness the union of two prominent families. You were told the story about redemption, success, and unwavering loyalty." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the front rows. Susan sat paralyzed in her emerald gown, her face frozen in a mask of total panic. Jessica, my maid of honor, stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes, clutching her bouquet against her chest. However, before we proceed with the exchange of vows, I continued gripping the microphone tightly. "Ethan and my father have some vital financial disclosures to share with the congregation. Transparency is, after all, the foundation of a healthy marriage." I pressed the button on the wireless clicker. The projector flared, illuminating the massive screen behind the altar in a blinding white light. A high-resolution image snapped into focus. The document displayed was not a photograph of a smiling couple standing on a snowy bridge in Boston. It was a digitized bank statement. The header displayed the emblem of a notorious financial institution operating out of the Cayman Islands. The account routing numbers were bold and clearly visible. The ledger rows detailed a series of massive inbound wire transfers originating from a domestic holding company. The recipient name attached to the offshore trust was printed in stark black letters. The account belonged entirely to Ethan Prescott. The ballroom erupted. Gasps of shock echoed from every corner of the venue. The regional politicians sitting in the center rows leaned forward, squinting at the screen to read the staggering dollar amounts listed on the ledger. A prominent local developer seated near the aisle covered his mouth with his hand, recognizing the transit codes from his own business dealings. The quiet whispers mutated into a chaotic roar of overlapping voices. Ethan spun around and staring at the projection. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow shell. He staggered backward, stumbling against the floral archway, snapping a wooden trellis. White rose petals rained down onto the carpet. "Turn that off!" Ethan screamed, his voice cracking. He lunged toward the podium, reaching for the microphone. "She is lying. The document is a forgery. Come on. Turn the screen off right now." I sidestepped his desperate grab, maintaining my position in the center of the platform. I did not raise my voice to match his panic. I spoke clearly into the microphone, letting the sound system carry my words over the rising chaos. "The deposits you see on the screen represent the $80,000 budget allocated for this specific wedding," I explained calmly, tracking his movements. "Ethan diverted the funds 3 weeks ago, routing the capital through a decentralized exchange to mask the theft." I aimed the clicker at the receiver and pressed the button a second time. The image on the screen shifted, transitioning to the next slide. The presentation was moving forward, and the trap was snapping shut. The cacophony inside the ballroom swelled, matching the intensity of a collapsing stadium. The 200 guests abandoned their polite decorum, pointing toward the massive projection screen. Regional politicians who moments ago were shaking Robert's hand now recoiled, muttering frantic instructions to their aides. The elite socialites who typically thrived on whispered country club gossip were stunned into open-mouthed disbelief. The illusion of the perfect New Hampshire family was disintegrating in real time, broadcasting in high definition for the entire state to witness. I maintained my position at the podium, gripping the microphone with a steady hand. My pulse remained slow and rhythmic. A forensic auditor does not panic when the numbers hit the ledger. We simply turn the page. I pressed the wireless clicker. The presentation transitioned. The image on the screen shifted from the Cayman Islands banking statement to a scanned copy of a 14-year-old state registration form. The header read, "Granite State Commercial Contractors." I highlighted the bottom right corner of the document, magnifying the area to fill the screen. The projection showcased the forged signature bearing my name, alongside the certifying witness signature belonging to Arthur Prescott. 14 years ago, I announced my voice cutting sharply through the rising din. My father stole my Social Security number while I was grieving the loss of my mother. He incorporated a commercial contracting firm under my name and deliberately defaulted on $400,000 in vendor debt. He triggered a federal tax penalty against a grieving teenager to dodge his own creditors. He then spent the next decade telling everyone in this room that I had a sealed criminal record for embezzlement. I turned my head and locked eyes with Robert. He stood paralyzed near the front row, his face matching the color of wet ash. The wealthy patriarch persona evaporated entirely, leaving behind a desperate, failing man stripped of his armor. He looked around the room, watching his business associates turn their backs on him. Ethan Prescott discovered this identity theft 3 years ago. I continued tracking my fiancé as he paced the altar. Instead of reporting the crime, Ethan used the forged documents to blackmail my father into a lucrative offshore laundering partnership. He engineered our entire relationship, utilizing my spotless auditing license as a shield to legitimize his syndicate. Robert finally broke his paralysis. A primal, panicked roar ripped from his throat. He lunged toward the altar, his polished tuxedo jacket tearing at the seam. He screamed that I was clinically insane, that the documents were elaborate digital fabrications designed by a hysterical woman. He scrambled onto the raised platform, waving his arms wildly to block the projection. Susan mirrored his desperation. She abandoned the front row entirely, hiking up the skirt of her emerald gown and sprinting toward the audiovisual control table in the back of the room. She shoved the technician aside and began yanking random cables from the soundboard, attempting to physically kill power to the projector. The system flickered momentarily, but the massive screen possessed a secondary internal battery. The projection remained bright and unforgiving. I ignored their chaotic scrambling. I pointed the clicker at the receiver and advanced the presentation. The screen flashed a complex digital spreadsheet. It was the master ledger Madison handed me the previous afternoon. I pre-programmed the slide to highlight the specific columns detailing the origin deposits alongside the final offshore balances. A bright red box appeared around the variance calculations. Ethan did not just launder the capital. I declared, speaking directly to Robert now. He skimmed the operation. Every time you authorized a transfer, Ethan siphoned the principal. He stole $500,000 from your failing real estate firm and routed the excess into a shadow account registered exclusively under his own name. Robert stopped waving his arms. He froze, slowly turning his head to look at the man standing a few feet away. The realization that he traded his entire empire to an extortionist who was actively robbing him shattered his remaining sanity. Robert let out a low, guttural sound, an animalistic noise born of total betrayal. He took a menacing step toward Ethan, clenching his fists. Ethan scrambled backward, tripping over the broken floral trellis. He held his hands up, palms facing outward, trying to ward off my father. He looked cornered, terrified, and cornered, but his arrogance had not entirely drained away. He believed he still possessed the ultimate trump card. He pointed a shaking finger at me across the altar. "You cannot do this," Ethan yelled, his voice cracking, breaking the microphone feed with his volume. "You are bluffing. You cannot expose the accounts without destroying yourself. We are getting married. I have a signed post-nuptial agreement. Your assets are legally tied to mine. If I go down, you absorb the liability. The contract is finalized." He thought he was protected. He thought the legal maneuvering he executed in the hotel hallway the night before guaranteed my silence. He assumed my professional reputation was shackled to his sinking ship, forcing me to bail water alongside him. I lowered the microphone from my mouth. I smiled. It was not the polite, curated smile I wore during the rehearsal dinner. It was a cold, genuine expression of absolute victory. I raised the clicker and pressed the button one final time. The projector clicked. The final slide materialized on the wall. It was a high-resolution scan of the document he signed less than 24 hours ago. The image displayed the bottom half of the fourth page, showcasing his stylized, heavy signature cutting across the dotted line. I magnified the paragraph position directly above the signature block, illuminating the dense legal text for the entire audience to read. I brought the microphone back to my lips. "You didn't sign a post-nuptial agreement, Ethan." I said the words echoing clearly through the vaulted ceiling. "You signed a declaration of asset forfeiture. The clauses you rushed through last night explicitly state that you voluntarily surrender all ownership rights to any decentralized digital currency and foreign trust accounts held in your name." Ethan stopped moving. His hand dropped slowly to his side. His eyes widened, staring at the blown-up text on the screen. He read the legal phrasing he bypassed in his arrogant rush to secure the shield. "You just legally transferred every single cent of your offshore holdings directly into a federal victim restitution fund." I concluded, my voice dropping to a clinical, precise tone. "The capital is gone, Ethan. You possess zero leverage. You hold no assets. The firewall you built is ash. The ultimate payoff landed with a devastating silent impact. The realization crashed down upon him. He spent 3 years orchestrating a complex extortion ring, seducing a woman to steal her credentials, and manipulating a corrupt patriarch. He thought he outmaneuvered the system. Instead, he walked blindly into a trap designed by a senior auditor and legally signed away millions of dollars in stolen wealth with his own expensive gold pen. He stared at me, his chest heaving, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He had absolutely nothing left. The prestige, the money, the impenetrable corporate shield, all of it evaporated in the span of 3 minutes. "You said I had a criminal record, Ethan," I told him, staring directly into his panicked eyes. "I do not, but you do." The ballroom remained suspended in a breathless vacuum. The guests were too shocked to move. Robert was too stunned by the double betrayal to attack. Susan stood crying beside the useless soundboard. The trap was fully sprung. The evidence was public record, and the architects of my suffering were exposed. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the venue swung open, shattering the frozen tableau. The federal authorities arrived exactly on schedule. The heavy oak doors at the rear of the country club ballroom swung open. The sudden movement snapped the frozen tension holding the room hostage. 6 figures stepped across the threshold. They did not wear designer suits or silk dresses. They wore dark tactical windbreakers, bearing 3 bold yellow letters stenciled across their shoulders. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived precisely on schedule. Their boots hit the hardwood floor with a rhythmic, heavy thud, commanding immediate authority. The string quartet had long since stopped playing, leaving only the sound of law enforcement advancing down the central aisle. 200 affluent guests sat immobilized. The regional power brokers and wealthy socialites shrank back into their gilded chairs. A moment ago, they were witnesses to a scandalous family drama. Now they found themselves trapped inside an active federal crime scene. Nobody dared to speak. Nobody reached for a cell phone. The air grew thick with a distinct, suffocating fear that only accompanies the sudden arrival of government personnel. Special Agent David Harris led the formation. He marched down the white-carpeted pathway, his eyes scanning the raised platform. He walked right past me. He offered no greeting and no acknowledgement of our prior arrangement in the windowless Concord office. I was no longer an informant negotiating terms. I was merely a bystander watching the machinery of justice execute its mandate. I stood near the wooden podium, my hands resting loosely at my sides, feeling the cool plastic of the wireless clicker against my palm. 2 officers peeled off from the main group flanking the floral archway to corner Ethan. My former fiancé retreated until his spine hit the shattered wooden trellis. He raised his hands chest high, offering a futile gesture of surrender. The pristine midnight blue tuxedo he wore now looked absurd against the stark reality of his situation. An investigator gripped his shoulder, spinning him around with practiced efficiency. The metallic ratcheting of steel handcuffs echoed sharply through the quiet venue. Ethan offered no physical resistance. The asset forfeiture trap had already broken his spirit. The physical restraints were merely a formality, concluding his downfall. Meanwhile, Harris and the 3 remaining tactical unit members ascended the steps toward my father. Robert straightened his posture, attempting to summon the ghosts of his former influence. He adjusted his torn lapel, puffing out his chest. He tried to deploy the prominent citizen routine that shielded him from consequences for decades. He projected a booming, authoritative tone, demanding to speak with his attorney. He threatened the squad with severe career repercussions for interrupting a private gathering. He cited his friendships with local judges and his philanthropic contributions to the city treasury. Harris did not blink. He pulled a folded warrant from his jacket and held it up for my father to see. The agent spoke in a flat, uncompromising cadence. He informed Robert that his corporate headquarters were currently undergoing a forensic digital sweep. Furthermore, Harris stated that the United States Department of State flagged the Thompson family passports at midnight. The private charter flight scheduled for Sunday morning was grounded. The escape route was dismantled. Robert lost his bluster, his shoulders slumped forward, and the hollow reality of a lengthy prison sentence settled over his features. Another set of steel cuffs locked around his wrists, pulling his arms behind his back. The wealthy patriarch persona dissolved, leaving a tired old man facing the consequences of a lifetime built on fraud. The sight of her husband in shackles shattered Susan in her remaining composure. She stood near the disabled audiovisual table, her emerald gown pooling around her ankles. Basic survival instinct overrode years of curated loyalty. Susan burst into loud, hysterical tears. She pointed a trembling finger at the man she married. Her voice pierced the silence, claiming she knew nothing about the offshore routing numbers or the stolen contractor capital. She shrieked that Robert controlled all the finances keeping her in the dark. She threw him to the wolves, hoping to salvage her own freedom. Her desperate performance earned zero sympathy from the agents. Harris nodded to a female officer who calmly escorted the weeping stepmother toward the exit. I watched the sequence unfold from the center of the altar. A different woman might have felt a surge of vindictive joy. She might have smiled or offered a parting remark to the people who tried to ruin her. I felt only a profound clinical detachment. My mother taught me that a balanced ledger requires no emotional embellishment. The debts were calculated. The liabilities were assigned. The accounts were finally closed. Robert stole my teenage years to hide his failures. Ethan tried to hijack my professional future to launder his theft. For 14 years, they manipulated the narrative, dictating my supposed flaws to the world. Seeing them stripped of their power and paraded in front of their peers provided a quiet, structural satisfaction. The architecture of their lies had collapsed under the weight of empirical evidence. The guests watched the procession with wide eyes. Jessica, my maid of honor, covered her mouth with both hands, tears of shock spilling over her eyelashes. A prominent developer in the third row slowly stood up, turning his back on my father, as the squad led the disgraced real estate mogul down the aisle. The social exile was instantaneous. In the circles of the elite, financial ruin acts as a contagious disease. Nobody wanted to catch the gaze of a convicted fraudster. Robert kept his head bowed, staring at the white carpet. He did not look at me as he passed. His shame was public and permanent. The two officers holding Ethan guided him toward the rear doors. His custom leather shoes dragged slightly against the floor. He looked pale, fragile, and entirely unremarkable. The charismatic investment banker who orchestrated a complex international syndicate was gone, replaced by a defeated criminal facing a decade behind bars. As he reached the center of the room, he paused. He turned his head, looking back over his shoulder. His eyes found mine across the distance. We stared at each other for 3 seconds. All the manufactured romance, the lavish dinners, and the fake promises dissolved into the empty space separating us. Ethan opened his mouth. His voice was gone lost to the shock of the raid. His lips formed a single silent word, please. It was a pathetic plea for mercy from a man who spent 3 years planning my destruction. He wanted the auditor to grant him a reprieve. He hoped a lingering shred of the decoy bride remained to offer comfort. I offered no response. I did not nod. I did not frown. I maintained a steady, unbroken gaze, allowing him to carry the weight of my indifference into his prison cell. I raised my right hand, aiming the wireless clicker at the receiver one last time. I pressed the button. The projector powered down. The massive screen faded to black. 6 months elapsed since the afternoon the federal authorities marched through the doors of the Bedford Country Club. The chaotic echo of that day faded into a distant memory, replaced by the profound silence of my new reality. The autumn air in the White Mountains carries a distinct crispness. It smells of damp pine needles and cold earth. I sit on the cedar porch of a modern cabin holding a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. The architecture of my new home features expansive glass windows designed to erase the boundary between the living space and the surrounding forest. I have no neighbors to the east or the west. The nearest paved road is 3 miles away. I traded the suffocating expectations of elite society for the isolated beauty of a high-elevation ridge. The regional news cycle spent several weeks obsessed with the spectacular collapse of the Thompson Syndicate. Reporters camped outside the sealed corporate headquarters, broadcasting endless segments dissecting the mechanics of the offshore pipeline. Financial journalists pored over the unsealed indictments, marveling at the audacity of the laundering scheme. Eventually, the media frenzy burned itself out, and the public attention drifted toward newer scandals. The quiet machinery of the justice system took over. Robert did not possess the stamina for a prolonged public trial. The prospect of facing his former peers from a defendant table terrified him more than the impending incarceration. He instructed his defense attorney to negotiate a plea agreement. My father surrendered all remaining physical properties and liquidated his meager domestic portfolios to satisfy a fraction of the outstanding victim restitution orders. He traded his right to a legal defense in exchange for a recommended sentence in a minimum security federal camp. The man who spent decades projecting an aura of untouchable wealth now wears a standard-issue uniform scrubbing cafeteria trays to earn basic commissary privileges. The affluent socialites who once drank his imported champagne erased his name from their directories. In the circles of the wealthy, a convicted fraudster is a ghost. Ethan experienced a far more severe reckoning. The federal prosecutors demonstrated zero leniency toward a licensed investment banker who exploited his institutional access to orchestrate an international extortion ring. The declaration of asset forfeiture he signed in the hotel hallway held up under intense judicial scrutiny. The judge ruled the document legally binding, stripping Ethan of every decentralized cryptocurrency token and foreign trust account he managed. The Regulatory Commission permanently revoked his financial licenses, resulting in immediate and irrevocable disbarment. He stood before the sentencing judge stripped of his tailored suits and his arrogant smirk. The court handed down a 10-year sentence in a standard penitentiary. He will spend the next decade surrounded by concrete walls, possessing zero leverage and zero wealth. The architect built his own cage. The collateral damage swept through the rest of the fractured family tree. Susan attempted to salvage her social standing by playing the role of the oblivious, betrayed wife. She filed for divorce the week following the arrests, hoping to distance herself from the radioactive fallout. Her efforts failed. The country club board discreetly revoked her membership. Her wealthy friends stopped returning her phone calls. She was forced to relocate to a modest rented apartment in a different county, far away from the boutique shops and the coastal cafes she once commanded. Madison faced her own harsh reality. The holding company Robert placed under her name formally collapsed, leaving a trail of unpaid municipal liens. While the authorities acknowledged her lack of operational involvement, the civil debt collectors showed no mercy. The creditors seized her imported luxury vehicle and drained her personal checking accounts to settle the outstanding obligations. The golden child was left penniless. A digital notification illuminated my mobile phone screen last Tuesday. It was a text message originating from Madison. The paragraph was long, frantic, and dripping with desperation. She detailed her current living conditions, complaining about her inability to secure employment and her mounting utility bills. In the final sentence, she pleaded for a short-term loan, citing our shared family history as justification for a financial bailout. I read the message while sitting on my cedar porch, watching the sunrise over the mountain peaks. I thought about the years she spent treating me with practiced indifference. I remembered her posing for a photograph, wearing stolen jewelry funded by my father's deceit. I did not type a response. I did not offer advice or extend a false olive branch. I pressed a single button and deleted the conversation thread. I left the plea unanswered. Establishing a healthy boundary requires recognizing when a bridge is burned beyond repair. I set my empty coffee mug onto the small wooden table beside my chair. I reached up and touched the cool gemstone resting against my collarbone. A secure parcel arrived via federal courier yesterday afternoon. The return address belonged to the prosecuting attorney's office in Concord. Inside the padded envelope, I found a brief typed letter from Special Agent Harris thanking me for my cooperation, alongside a small velvet box recovered from an evidence locker. The sapphire pendant caught the early morning light, casting a deep velvet blue reflection. Wearing the heirloom no longer feels like a violation. The stone was cleansed of the corruption Robert and Ethan attached to it. The necklace represents my mother's true legacy. It symbolizes her unwavering commitment to honesty and her meticulous approach to life. I wear the jewel not as a display of wealth, but as a permanent reminder of the values she instilled in me before her passing. I stand up and walk back inside the cabin. Stepping through the sliding glass doors, my home office occupies a bright, open corner of the living space. A heavy oak desk holds my primary workstation and my specialized diagnostic monitors. I am still a senior forensic auditor. I did not abandon my career or change my professional trajectory. The firm I work for transitioned me to a permanent remote schedule following the high-profile conclusion of the investigation. I continue to track vanished millions, decode phantom transactions, and untangle the web spun by corporate embezzlers. I conduct my audits surrounded by the quiet hum of the forest, answering to no one but my own ethical standards. I purchased this mountain property outright. I did not require a mortgage or a bridge loan. I utilized the legitimate capital I earned through years of disciplined labor and careful savings. The deed is registered solely under my name, devoid of hidden clauses, secondary guarantors, or opaque legal jargon. The walls around me belong to me. The floor beneath my feet is secure. I did not need a fabricated inheritance to secure my future. I did not require a marriage built on blackmail and extortion to achieve financial stability. The men in my life believed they could utilize my pristine credentials to camouflage their own failures. They assumed a quiet auditor would simply bow her head and sign the paperwork to avoid a public confrontation. They underestimated the core nature of my profession. When a forensic investigator encounters a discrepancy in the ledger, we do not look away. We isolate the anomaly. We trace the missing variables back to the source. We apply the necessary corrections until the math balances perfectly. I sit down at the oak desk and boot up my computer. The screens glow, casting a steady light across the room. I open a new client file, preparing to begin the daily hunt for hidden truth. My pulse beats in a slow, calm rhythm. The heavy anxiety that defined the weeks leading up to the failed wedding is entirely gone. I possess a deep, enduring peace. I built my own foundation, far away from the toxic influence of elite social circles and corrupt real estate empires. My current life cannot be audited for weaknesses. My independent wealth cannot be leveraged or stolen. I constructed a reality based on verifiable facts and transparent ledgers. The path to this sanctuary required walking through a storm of systemic gaslighting and generational fraud, but the destination was worth every calculated step. The story ends here in the quiet elevation of the White Mountains. My father spent 14 years telling everyone I was a criminal. In the end, I was just the executioner. There is a familiar image woven into the fabric of American culture. It is the picture of the pristine suburban home, the manicured lawn, the bustling country club, and the family that smiles perfectly for the holiday greeting cards. We are taught to aspire to this image. We are conditioned to believe that providing a stable, affluent environment is the ultimate measure of parental success. But when we strip away the veneer of wealth and social standing, what actually holds the walls of a family together? The story of Claire Thompson is a masterclass in the quiet, devastating consequences of transactional parenting. It forces us to look past the grand weddings and the imported champagne to examine the very foundation of how we raise our children. At its core, this is not just a tale of corporate embezzlement or a dramatic wedding day revenge. It is a cautionary narrative about the sacred responsibility of a parent and what happens when that responsibility is corrupted by selfishness. When we bring children into this world, we make an unspoken vow to act as their shield. A parent's primary duty is to equip their child with the moral and emotional tools required to navigate a complex world. Claire's mother understood this deeply. Even as she was losing her battle with cancer, she did not coddle her daughter with empty platitudes. She handed Claire a compass for truth, teaching her that while people may deceive, the raw data of reality never lies. That single lesson, a framework built on honesty and meticulous integrity, became the armor that eventually saved Claire's life. True parental guidance is not about handing a child a trust fund. It is about handing them a resilient mind. Contrast this with Robert Thompson. Robert represents the ultimate betrayal of the traditional family structure. Instead of serving as a protector, he viewed his daughter as an asset to be leveraged. When his own choices led to financial ruin, he did not face the consequences like an adult. He stole his grieving 18-year-old daughter's identity. He burdened her with his debts, and then he spent the next 14 years gaslighting her, convincing their entire social circle that she was the broken one. This type of emotional manipulation is a poison that destroys the root system of a family. When a parent lies to cover their own flaws, they rob the child of a stable reality. Children naturally look to their parents to define the world. If a father insists the sky is green, a child will doubt their own eyes before they doubt their father. Robert weaponized that innate trust. He engineered a dynamic where his love was conditional, tied entirely to Claire's compliance and silence. In modern society, we often emphasize the importance of providing for our children financially. But we must ask ourselves, what good is financial provision if it costs a child their sense of reality and self-worth? The tragedy of the Thompson family extends beyond Claire. We must also look closely at Madison, the stepdaughter who was raised as the favored golden child. It is easy to view Madison as a villain, a spoiled beneficiary of Robert and Susan's deceit. But from a parenting perspective, Madison is a profound victim of emotional neglect. Susan and Robert raised Madison in a bubble of elite entitlement, teaching her that her value was inherently tied to luxury cars, exclusive boutiques, and high society status. They never taught her resilience. They never taught her fairness or the value of honest labor. When parents play favorites, showering one child with unearned rewards while isolating another, they do a massive disservice to both. The neglected child is forced to develop a hardened premature independence, often losing their softness and their ability to trust. But the favored child is left entirely defenseless against the real world. When the federal authorities froze the accounts and the illusion of wealth shattered, Madison broke completely. She had no internal foundation to fall back on. Her parents built her a castle on a fault line. And when the earthquake hit, she was left sitting in the rubble, unable to save herself. Raising a child with genuine emotional awareness means preparing them for the days when the money is gone and the applause stops. It means teaching them who they are in the quiet, unglamorous moments of life. The contrast between Claire and Madison highlights the critical importance of fairness in a blended family. When a household fractures and reforms, the adults hold the delicate responsibility of ensuring every child feels equally valued. Susan failed as a mother figure by treating Claire as an obstacle, while Robert failed as a father by treating his stepdaughter as a convenient fall guy for his toxic corporate debt. They viewed their children not as human beings to be nurtured, but as playing pieces on a chessboard. If we want to build families that endure, we have to start by telling the truth. We must have the emotional maturity to admit our own mistakes to our children, rather than forcing them to carry the weight of our failures. Honesty breeds respect, and respect is the only currency that matters when a family faces genuine hardship. A child who grows up in a home where truth is spoken, even when it is uncomfortable, learns how to face the world with a steady gaze. Stories like Claire's remind us that the legacy we leave behind is rarely tied to the bank accounts we pass down. Our true legacy lives in the resilience, the ethics, and the boundaries we instill in the next generation. If you find yourself captivated by these deep dives into family dynamics, betrayal, and the ultimate triumph of personal integrity, I encourage you to join our community. Please follow the channel Sophia Told Stories. We explore the complex, often hidden layers of human relationships, bringing you narratives that challenge the way we view loyalty, love, and justice. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and become part of a conversation that seeks the truth beneath the surface. As you close the book on the Thompson family, take a moment to reflect on your own life. Look at the foundation of the house you are building. Look at the relationships you nurture with the people who look up to you. Are you passing down a legacy of transparency and quiet strength? Or are you handing them a burden wrapped in a beautiful box? The ledgers of our lives are not tallied in dollars and cents. They are balanced by the promises we keep, the truths we tell, and the moments we choose to stand as shields rather than shadows. We all leave something behind for our children to inherit. The lingering question remains,